Welcome to the Continuous Delivery Podcast. My name is Zarar.
I'm Gino.
I'm Csaba.
We're back after a long time. Welcome, a listener, to a long-awaited episode of the podcast. We promise to be more consistent going forward. So let's get started, though. Our topic today is not the test pyramid, but something new that I encountered over the weekend. It's called the testing trophy. The link to the tweet and the article are in the show notes. But essentially, it looks like one of our colleagues described it as a third place trophy. So if you're used to a regular testing pyramid, which has unit tests at the bottom, which is the biggest chunk, then integration tests, which is a smaller chunk, and then at the top you have UI tests, which is the smallest of them all. This one looks like a trophy where the bottom part is something called static tests, and we'll get into that. Which is a fair bit of tests there. And then you have unit tests, which are smaller than static tests. And then you have a massive chunk of integration tests. And then you have end-to-end tests. And the proportion of end-to-end tests seem to be the same as unit tests. So when I posted this in the Slack channels, a lot of reaction came from this little picture. But let me first tell you the rationale behind the author on why where he's coming from. One of his thinking is that quality is ultimately driven by integration tests, and integration tests are the ones that talk to another component, which is maybe on a different network or a REST call or what have you, and that's what he calls integration tests, and those should be the most tests you have in your suite. And unit tests are actually scaled back a little bit. So your initial reaction to this, guys, on this pyramid or this trophy that we saw, Gino, what did you think of it?
Well, first of all, I tried to make sense of it, right? So when I see this big chunk of integration tests, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I didn't read the article, but I'm glad that you just introduced us to it. Zarar. I find there seems to be a misalignment between what provides value and how do you verify that value is indeed provided. I don't think that these things are the same, right? So it's not because the most value comes in tying all of your components together and providing the value that way, that this is where the majority of your testing needs to go. I think those are not necessarily directly related.
Yeah. And I know, Csaba, that you had a comment on what these static tests were. And once we dug into it a little bit, it basically pointed to things like linting and those kind of like pre-commit automated checks. And there's the author here, Kent C. Dodd, suggests that these should be a big part of your test suite. I feel like that's a 2-second job a linter does before you commit. What am I missing here?
Yeah, it was funny because I had to actually look it up. The first time I heard about the testing trophy when you shared it with us. So and then I look it up, and interestingly, actually, I ran into a Martin Fowler article, which I want to come back to based on what Gino said. But to answer your question, it's interesting because part of the static things, they list things such as, let's say, code reviews, which we know that this group is completely, I don't want to say completely against, but there are other ways, there are better ways to do this, right? So pretty much static, what they were saying is anything when you are, when a human or a system is looking at the code, the static code pretty much, right? And one of the, out of those 8 to 10 examples, one of them was the static code analysis tool, is pretty much what you were referring to as linting. As static. Okay, so now I started making the linkage in my brain. But I agree with you. I don't think we should do any kind of manual or as little possible manual of this static analysis when we have all these tools already out there. So yeah, I kind of agree with you that maybe the bottom of the trophy could be much, much, much thinner. But I love the fact that somebody calls this out as part of the quality. It's not calling anymore a testing pyramid. They call it more like a quality trophy or quality. I guess a quality image or picture, because I think that code analysis contributes to that, to the ultimate quality.
Yeah, look, it's indeed not testing, right, at that moment. So that's kind of one thing. but there has been a situation in which we were creating software to test large physical systems, and all that software was written in Python. And so it was test code that we ended up writing tests for, because oftentimes, and those were really long running tests that were related to physical systems that replicated all kinds of data and so forth. So you have to wait basically until all that stuff had happened. And we ended up once in a while in a situation where, because there are scripts it's written in Python that we made a mistake in the test code, and as a result, we didn't get the outcome of the test at the very end because it failed. It was a syntax error. And our tests, what they're actually doing was they were verifying whether or not we did not have any syntax errors. And that was meaningful to us. So we had tests for our tests, which did pretty much what I understand these static tests to do, right? So there are situations where that might be valuable, but to consider this to be kind of the foundation of your entire testing strategy, that seems a little bit overkill.
Yeah, and I think as I was, the way I clued onto this article was on Hacker News, where I was this guy who's an SRE, a system reliability engineer. He was giving advice on how to test systems, and he was a huge advocate of this because he felt that a lot of the bugs that he ends up catching are actually in pre-production during the UI testing of during the smoke testing. And the reactions were pretty much predictably like, dude, you're catching them way too late, and maybe that needs to change. But I want to pull on something else here. This differentiation between unit and integration testing. Mm-hmm. While you got your hand up, we'll go to you in a bit. But this differentiation between unit and integration testing, I've always found it a little gray, because you write integration tests still using the same XUnit tools that you would use to use a test for a class. Well, let me go to you first on like what your you made a face there. What do you think of the distinction there? Is it needed? Is there better language we can use? Can we distinguish these two? Because it seems to end up causing a lot of confusion, as it's doing with this trophy here.
Well, when I think about those names, I'm not thinking about the tools that you're using to write those or automate those particular tests. Unit tests can just as well be manual. They don't have to be written in JUnit. And it's not because you write a test in JUnit or you automate a test in JUnit that it suddenly becomes a unit test either, right? So the tool that you're using to write your tests has absolutely nothing to do with the type of tests or the level of tests that you're producing. So when we're talking about unit tests, we're talking about the level that they're testing. And what they're actually doing is, when you go back to the ancient V model, the level that they're testing is really at the code, right? So you're not testing components, you're not testing systems at that moment. You're testing code, individual small units in your code, which might be a certain branch within a function, which might either function altogether, which might be any situation that this particular method is taken care of, but not necessarily the entire system. So the fact that you're using something that is called XUnit does not make the artifacts that you're producing with that tool a unit test.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny that you guys mentioned this was actually the Martin Fowler article was actually focusing on in the entire test trophy. It was just focusing on this ambiguity between unit and integration. And Martin Fowler pretty much did the same definition, what I refer as definition. When you are testing a single method or a single class and you mock out everything behind that, so you are focusing on behavior, that's from a unit, right? In the moment when you start. And again, and this is where the gray line starts. What if you include in that test another method within the same class? Is this still a unit, but you are not mocking this out now? Is this still a unit, or are you doing integration? Or is integration when this class reaches beyond the boundaries of that class? Is that the integration? So I think unit itself, I think we can fairly pin it down. When it comes to integration, it becomes a much larger I don't know, scope
thing.
Yeah,
I kind of like where you went there, Csaba, because I think I just came up with a differentiation between unit and integration. If you have to mock anything, it's an integration test.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't say that either, because if you don't mock anything, that doesn't make it a unit test either, right? If you're testing an entire system that is complete,
right, with the exception of end-to-end tests, fine, I get it. But I'm talking about, at the X unit level. I know I get your tools point, but if you have to mock something, whether it's a dependency, which is a JSON payload coming from somewhere, or an object that the thing requires, that I could make an argument that you're seeing whether this component integrates with the other component, whereas in a kind of pure classic unit test, you're hitting the class with just what it expects in production, and you test the internals of it that way. Csaba.
But I just wanted to add that if you take the definition, that I think that the testing trophy actually is correct, because you will have very, very few examples where your method doesn't call out other methods. You will have very, very, very few examples. So unless that method is like a mathematical or some kind of a computational or some kind of a very, very isolated method, 90% of the methods call out to different classes, right? So that's why. So then we are actually arguing to no. Okay, I see.
Well, it's no, because here's the distinction I'd like to make there is that if you have a class which takes in as parameter another object, you have the option to either mock that object or create that object from scratch using new. I'm differentiating between the two. If you are mocking it for some reason, maybe it's too expensive to create or whatever, maybe that's an integration test. But if you're actually passing the object as the class expects it to, and it's the actual real object, then maybe it's a unit test. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm putting forth a definition. I'm happy to be challenged by it,
So for me, the definition is slightly different. If you're testing the interaction between components, you're talking about an integration test. Whether that's an integration test in the small, which might be an interaction between multiple classes, integration test in the large, which might be interaction between multiple systems. But if you're only testing the code related to a specific class, a specific function, a specific method, then we're talking about a unit test. So you're testing either the interaction or you're testing the functionality within the class.
Can we break this dialogue in a way that just test your damn code? That's it. And it doesn't matter if you're using a mock or whatnot.
Right.
If it's in process. So this is where my differentiation actually. If it's in process, right? Your mock is in process. Then that's in that realm that's supposed to be big and fat and well thought out, right? And anytime you do going out of process, so you have to involve multiple servers and stuff. That's where you are supposed to have super, super small and super, super few of them, because it's very, very hard to set up and do that. So I think if we just agree that together, that integration and unit together, whatever you want to call it, it's supposed to be 90% of your test, or even 95, whatever high percentage of your test, automated test, I think that's a good common denominator.
I think the rule should be make sure that the majority of your tests are the easiest to maintain. And however you make that happen, I really don't care.
Yeah, I always, when I look at, say, a GitHub repo that I want to learn a little bit more about, or even if I'm working with a team and I want to see what they're doing, I try to read their tests. Like I start there because that's what I was taught by, when I was a programmer, that you start with the tests and you work your way backwards, because the tests are your documentation of the system. And I think if we keep that principle in mind, and you, as a programmer, you create them in a way where that that a fellow programmer will need to understand the system, and how will they best understand it? Maybe that's the principle that we can take away from this. And any other thoughts on what makes a clean test suite, Csaba?
I would add one principle that I learned a long time ago from a really, really good developer, that treat your tests as if they were production code. Apply the same rigor as they were production code. So you are not going to build up technical debt in your tests, right? And
well, Gino's definitely doing that. He's writing test code for his test code, I heard earlier.
In that particular situation, yes.
Is there test code for the test code for the test code?
No, we didn't go that far.
Okay,
so
all right.
Our tests were running hours, and our test to test that test code was running in sub-second or something like that, right?
It's like a tongue twister. Test the test code, the test code.
Exactly.
Okay. You know what? Let's leave it at that. It's our return of the Continuous Delivery podcast after a long break. We'll do this much more frequently going forward. Thank you, Gino. Thank you, Csaba. Thank you, listener. We'll see you again soon enough. Goodbye.